Welcome to the Engel Expert Access Series. Today we're speaking to Andrew Mosawi, president of iATS Payments by Deluxe, the leading provider of integrated payment solutions for nonprofit organizations. Andrew is a business leader and entrepreneur who's passionate about growing companies and especially those that are working hard to make a difference in the world. Andrew has led teams from startup to successful exit and has been instrumental in driving growth and turnarounds in the organizations he's been involved with. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Well, before we get into the questions, can you just take a minute and walk me through your background?
Yeah, certainly. So the company iATS has been around for 21 years. I was actually one of the founding team of iATS back in 2001 in the nonprofit side. Before then, based here in Vancouver, we were serving actually travel agencies, hence the iATS acronym, because they were all the rage back in those days in the travel sector. And I came on board and rolled out the solution to nonprofit organizations. And then shortly after, it was successful that we actually sort of shut down the travel side of the business. So yeah, the business has been going since 2001, let's say. We've grown over the course of the last 21 years. We're certainly one of the largest providers of payment processing solutions to charities. We have about 16,000 nonprofits across North America. We work through our technology partners, so integrated payments, as you mentioned, Robert. And we have about over 100 integrated partners that we work with serving our customers, and we process billions and billions of dollars of donations for those customers and continue to grow.
Wow. Awesome. Well, you told me a bit about iATS. Is there anything around the areas of expertise? You've got global reach. Anything else about iATS specifically that other folks might want to know about that you haven't already discussed?
I always like the story when a lot of people talk about the nonprofit sector and they wonder how we started. I always love the story, the origin story of iATS, and it was actually the founder of the company had received his annual tax receipt from a local environmental organization. So this is going back maybe now 25 years probably. And that customer is actually still, I won't say their name, but they're still a customer today. And when he had received his annual tax receipt, it was for his monthly gift, he got a piece of paper through the mail and it had 10 point of sale receipts stapled to that annual receipt. And they'd obviously had, and so when he inquired, they'd actually said, well, we have volunteers that come in and, they go to machines and they essentially just take out all of the monthly donors and then they sort of manually process them into the machines, probably even the ka-chunk machines, if you remember those.
Yeah.
And so it used to take them 2 days, 3 days. And he said there must be a better way. So set up this very easy way to upload a batch of transactions, and what used to take days ended up taking seconds. And that was really the story of how we started. And even though a lot has happened and we've invested a lot of technology along the way, and we have a wonderful partner network that helps us achieve a lot, the methodology is still the same. Our goal is to save our customers, charitable organizations, nonprofits, time and money. Yes, we can certainly save money. We can do things from a payment standpoint. I know we're going to talk about that, but it's also our goal to save them time, because my comment is always, I've never met a nonprofit that is overstaffed or over-resourced. So how can we do things to help our customers, working with our partners, save time so they can just focus on their mission, whatever that mission might be?
Well, so that brings me to my next question. Why does iATS focus on payment processing for nonprofits?
Well, and that's really what we found out at the very early on, was that it was a very, very underserved sector. It was a group of organizations that desperately needed help. They desperately needed a way to make the complex simple, and they needed a helping hand to walk them through that process. And so we built our organization, and to this day, we still build our organization to serve that one particular sector. That's our value. That's why we are successful and have been successful for so long, where it is not one sector that we serve. We don't go from talking to a nonprofit to talking to a restaurant or talking to another provider. We focus entirely on that, and that's our value. And so, we certainly extend to other markets within the nonprofit sector. So higher education, healthcare, faith-based, there are multiple sort of verticals within it. But our value comes from understanding and having a domain expertise about the market we're in, the problems that our customers need help solving, and then working out how best we can solve them together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really it. We've enjoyed that. We enjoy that level of focus. We enjoy serving that market. Even from an employment standpoint, it allows us to actually choose team that loves serving the nonprofit sector and are passionate about serving and giving back. Mm-hmm. So every element of our business is helped by the fact that we just focus on that sector. Now, we have other businesses as a group that focus on other verticals, and we love doing that as well. But our focus remains there because that's what we do. That's what our expertise is in. That's what we enjoy continuing to do.
Awesome. And so with that in mind, how is payment processing different for nonprofits than for other sectors?
So I know every sector likes to think that they're different, but having worked in this sector for so long, and full disclosure, I went after iATS was sold back in sort of in 2010. I went and worked for a software company again in the nonprofit sector, running their international business, and then I went off before coming back to iATS back in 2016. So I've seen a lot of different sectors from a lot of different perspectives. However, I know that the nonprofit sector truly is different. And so if you're a for-profit business, you're really doing business in a couple of ways. I mean, you either have a storefront, a retail environment, or you're selling product online. There aren't other than that, there aren't really many other aspects for it. There's obviously, I'm being reductive, and there's a lot more complexity to that. But when you're a nonprofit, you're working hard to raise money wherever you can. That could be one-time gifts. It could be recurring donations. It could be events, galas. It could be face-to-face fundraising. It could be auction. It could be a whole load of different ways. And each one of them has a different mechanism for accepting payments, processing payments, a different cost structure, maybe even a different software system that the customer is using, that the nonprofit is using. And so what ends up happening is this spider's web of complexity that nonprofits have that doesn't really exist in the for-profit sector. And through our ecosystem of partners, we've been able to help nonprofits consolidate that and have, essentially one partnership, one relationship that serves all of those different fundraising and transactional payment needs, whether that's an auction gift, or whether that's an online donation or a peer-to-peer fundraising gift, or a monthly ACH transaction, as an example. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about the complexity, that's what I mean by the complexity difference between the nonprofit and other verticals.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what are the benefits of a payment processing tool?
Well, obviously, I think in every sector it's different, but in the nonprofit sector, you really you need to have an efficient back-end processing solution that not only integrates with whatever solution you're using to collect and manage data, but also to properly reconcile and report that information. And more often than not, you need access to good customer service to be able to help understand what's going on and to be able to answer any questions that you have. Payments are complex. There are a worrying number of hops that a transaction makes between the time a consumer like myself puts down my credit card to the money actually getting to where it's supposed to be. The complexity of the network, whether that's the card brand, the issuing banks, the processor, the authorizer, there is a number, or indeed when you're going to things like Apple Pay or Google Pay, wallets, there are a number of different stages, and that creates a lot of complexity. And so a payment solution, a proper payment solution, needs to speak to all of those things. Way back when we first started, to get a payment, to even process a payment, you used to have to go to your bank to get a merchant account. So you'd have to go get a merchant account for Visa, MasterCard. Then you'd have to get another one for American Express. Then you'd have to find a gateway to manage those, to actually get the transaction from whatever it is that you're using, a terminal or an online donation page. Well, we simplify that process by wrapping everything together. Mm-hmm. So the nonprofit doesn't have to go to multiple different places. They sign one agreement, and then that's it. We give them the ability to process, manage, settle, reconcile everything in one place. Now, that's not revolutionary now. When you say that now, it's like, well, my goodness, everyone does that. Yeah, you're right. But back in 2001, 2002, it was unheard of, and we really did. We sort of paved the way, and we were one of the first of our kind doing that. Not just in the nonprofit sector, but just generally.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the different types of donation methods that require payment processing? in the nonprofit world?
So a lot of it is, again, going back to the complexity. So we have organizations that are doing recurring gifts. And so that might be just me suggesting I want to give $5, $10 a month to a charity, and that's in perpetuity. That will go on forever. There's pledges, which is I commit to giving $1,000 over the course of the next year in equal installments that has a beginning and an end date. Then there could be a shop front. There could be like Goodwill has retail environments. It could be auctions, telethons. It could be one-time gifts, major gifts. Most organizations still rely very, very heavily on direct mail programs. Given the average age of donors, then a lot of those direct mail programs do generate high volumes of checks, high volumes of credit card returns, etc. So they really come in from all aspects. Nonprofits are not fussy about how they raise money, nor should they be, because they raise them in any way they possibly can to achieve the things they need to achieve.
Right. Okay. And so what's the difference between a payment processor and an online donation tool?
So, well, you have to really, that line is getting thinner, shall we say. The online donation tool is really an ability for any organization, let's say a nonprofit, to be able to accept a donation. But it's really not very, it doesn't really work unless it's sort of linked to a payment processing solution. Now, having said that, I'm sure there are organizations out there that don't have it linked, that they just have a tool and then it collects the data. But there's, and I'm sure your customers will know that there is PCI security compliance issues that are existing about not wanting to touch credit card data, because as soon as you get involved in managing the data, then your scope of PCI compliance and certification increases significantly. And so if you really want to be careful and manage your security and compliance, then you want to link your online donation page to a trusted payment provider that is within scope, that can process, manage, and then reconcile and report the payments that are being processed on the donation page. So to answer your question, the line is getting thinner, but it still exists.
Okay. So let's get down into the weeds of this. Why don't you tell us how payment processing works? As you know, I've spent a little bit of time in my own career in this space, and I know it's far more complex than most people realize. So why don't you tell us how it works?
Yeah, and it is. And it probably requires another interview session completely and a PowerPoint to go through it. But I mean, very simply, the process is, how at the issuing bank, so the card issuing bank, it's how the payment comes from that bank all the way through to the merchant. And so essentially in this process, it all starts with a merchant. And I say merchant, we don't like to call them merchants at iATS. They're our customers, they're our nonprofit clients. But in the broader payment processing world, they're referred to as merchants. And essentially, in order to accept a payment, you need a merchant account. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is essentially you're being given credit. You're being given credit and being offered credit just like you would do in a loan. So to get a merchant account, you need to essentially be approved for credit, and you need to be approved to get a payment account. So the first step is to actually set up a merchant account. Now, once you've done that, then you are able to accept the payment methods that you've set the account up. So typically it's Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Diners Discover, let's say in the US. And then that gives you the ability to accept them. Then you would need to find a way to process those transactions. And you may well, by wherever you got your merchant account, be given a virtual terminal. You may be given a point of sale machine. They may, like us, have integrations to the software providers that are endemic in the nonprofit space or whatever vertical are being served. So that is really the fundamental start of it all. And then really the under the weeds thing and the mechanics of it is how the transaction flows through a sponsor bank, through a gateway, to one of only a couple of essentially gateway solutions that then goes to a central clearinghouse that actually allows the transaction to go from point A from point B. And we, as an acquirer, and we're an acquirer in the markets that we serve, we sit at the bottom of that chain. So we actually manage the flow of funds that goes from the issuing bank all the way through to the merchant or the nonprofit in that case.
Okay.
I hope I haven't confused it even more than it was confusing at the beginning.
No, I know from experience that it is a complex, much more complex process than most people ever can imagine. Okay, so let's jump into the next question. So what's the difference between PayPal and a payment processor, as an example? It's a common question we get.
Yeah. So I would categorize, and so PayPal is a really interesting one because they do both, but mostly they're known as being we would classify them as a digital wallet. And so the wallet, and so you can think of Venmo, you can think of PayPal, it's essentially a digital wallet, account, whatever, that holds a stored currency, whatever that might be, depending on where you are. And so when you buy something on it, you're essentially drawing on that stored currency. So it's not really a credit. It's almost as though it's a digital wallet that people have in much the same way as, let's call it, crypto would be. It's like it's a wallet that holds a crypto, or in this case, it's a PayPal store of funds. And so that is slightly different than a credit card, which is essentially it's actually credit funds that I'm using as a consumer, as a cardholder, and then paying off at the end of the month or in 6 months or whatever it is that I do. And so that's the distinction between a wallet and a credit card that would get processed through the credit card system. And then to add even more complexity, there's what's called ACH and ACH EFT, depending on what market you're in, direct debit if you're in the UK. And that's really when a fund doesn't come out of a credit card or a wallet, it comes directly out of your bank account. So I set up with a charity a recurring gift of $5 a month, $10 a month. I give them my banking details, and they essentially draw that money out of my account every month.
Okay. So can you drill into that? So I also had a question around the difference between ACH debit and credit card payments. Can you just highlight that one more time? I think you kind of covered it, but let's go into that in a little more detail.
Sure. So let's call it a credit debit transaction is where instead of a credit card where I'm essentially holding funds and then potentially paying off funds at a future date. The debit scenario, and in Canada as an example, we would just have it's just like our Interact card. It's like it's a debit card. Instead of us holding those funds until the end of the month, like a credit card would do, that money is coming straight out of my bank account there and then. Okay. And so it's still being pushed through the same rails as the Visa network, MasterCard network. But instead of it being stored value on a card or a credit card until the end of the month, it's basically coming out of my bank account immediately.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So are there security features relating to payment processing that nonprofits should care about?
Yeah, sadly, yes. One of the things that the nonprofit suffers from, which is a sad fact of the environment, is that they're targets for certain types of fraud that we don't see in other sectors. Mm-hmm. And the most typical one is, and especially from now as we sort of move to Giving Tuesday, and I don't know if your customers have, undoubtedly know Giving Tuesday. It's the very big, either the end of November, beginning of December. It's the big giving day of the year, leading up to the end of the year. Well, what we see is a lot of fraudulent attacks where individuals have stolen credit cards and they want to check if the credit cards work. And the sad fact is that because there is no consideration in the nonprofit environment, it's not like I'm buying something on Amazon or and I'm getting that delivered and they won't deliver it if my card doesn't go through. But it doesn't work like that in the nonprofit. You can go for $5 donation to see if the card works, and if it doesn't work, then fine, you move to the next one. So that type of fraud sometimes is not checked in the for-profit environment. And with a lot of organizations that aren't used to that type of fraud, it's not picked up. So what we do is we have actually a whole team, we have software. Everything is dedicated to understanding that particular type of fraud and blocking it at source, either identifying what it is, how it looks, where it comes from, and then blocking it at source. So we're not actually reducing the amount of valid donations that the organization is getting while protecting them from the potentially fraudulent ones. Yeah. That's the first type. And I think that, sadly, that's the biggest type of fraud that we see, or attempted fraud in the nonprofit sector. And then there's the other type, which is more generic to to sectors just generally, which is where people would set up fraudulent merchant accounts in order to do similar types of things to try to get, to solicit money fraudulently or illegally off people under the guise of something legitimate. And that again is, we're not an aggregator. We're a full service provider, which what that means is that every single nonprofit customer of ours has a merchant account. The difference for us is that we're not actually going through, because we only deal with one sector, it's a lot easier for us to go through screening processes, boarding, so it's very quick. But once they have, that's an account that is theirs. So it actually stops that type of fraud at source, because we're very careful about the accounts that we set up and the types of accounts that we set up. And it's easier for us to do, of course, because we're in one vertical. It's much more difficult if you're operating just generically in multiple verticals and you're doing you have hundreds of thousands of merchants signing up on a let's call it monthly basis. And so it's a different type of challenge at that scale.
Okay. So let's jump into that gray and murky area of fees. So many people struggle with the fees associated with payment processing. So are you able to just shed some light on what they are and how they work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. It's a question we get a lot, obviously. It is, if we think the flow of funds is complicated, then it's nothing compared to the price and the cost structure. It is, if any large customers that do a good volume in payments will know, if you ever receive a credit card statement from a sort of traditional processor, it can sometimes, it's sometimes like a Russian novel. I mean, they're massive. And the reason for that is there are multiple components to payments. So there are gateway fees, of course. So there's the gateway fees, there's setting up merchant accounts, there's monthly fees associated with merchant accounts. And then there's the transaction accounts as well. And it's not as simple as saying Visa has a percentage-based transaction, because it doesn't. Interchange fees, so credit card fees, credit card fees are percentage-based because they're based on interchange, which is a percentage. But not all card brands are created equal. So a Visa corporate card will have a different interchange rate than a personal card, or a fancy American Express with lots of rewards is going to have a much higher interchange rate than a standard green American Express card. A transaction from a Canadian credit card holder donating or paying for something in the US is going to be higher than a domestic card because it's a cross-border fee. So it's not as simple as saying Visa interchanges this and American Express is this, because it really depends on the type of card. On top of the percentage-based fees, there are other percentage-based fees, and it's called DF&A, which is dues, fees, and assessments, which is transactional fees and percentage fees that are charged either by the acquirer, by the card brand, by the sponsor, by the gateway. There could be fees for account updata, as an example, which is a solution that allows organizations to update credit cards for recurring gifts. So if somebody has a recurring subscription or a donation, it essentially sweeps a database and updates the expiry date. So therefore, the transaction doesn't just stop when the card expires. So it stops attrition of those donors or subscribers. And there are fees attached to that as well. And there are multiple others that I could go in talk about. And I think that's the complexity that actually a lot of, again, that is almost becoming not standard, but certainly exists now with some providers, whereas it's a static fee and it's 1% fee across all. But it's something we've always done. In the nonprofit sector, we keep it very clean. We don't actually have any other fees there's no fraud fees. We don't, for fraud checking, for reporting, for daily deposits, we do daily deposits. We don't hold funds and do weekly deposits. We don't charge extra for that. So what we've tried to do is really limit all of those and have one simple fee, mostly because we want to cut down on the time for reconciliation, for just understanding the flow of funds, we just want to make it simple. And so we've done that from the very beginning, because we just try to make the complex simple wherever we can, and that seems like a very, very easy place to make a big impact. Yeah,
and I think it's important for merchants or nonprofits or any business for that matter to recognize that the fees aren't your decision. They're something that everybody, regardless of how you get your payments processed, you will incur these fees because they're basically set by the network of providers within that whole system and that whole flow.
That's right. And another thing that it's a great point that you made, Robin, because also not all merchants are created equal. So a retail or a restaurant is going to have different rates than a nonprofit. It is going to have a different rates than another. So what type of organization you have creates the risk profile. And ironically, nonprofits, we've been doing this so long, we don't see it as a risky sector. We think it's a very wonderful sector. That's all we do. However, a lot of acquirers actually classify it as a higher risk vertical. And so, I think that's the other piece there, which is when you get to understand a vertical, you can understand the risk elements to it, and then it allows us to be a little bit more thoughtful about how we manage things like pricing and deposits, things like that, because we can understand the risk because of our experience.
Right. Okay. So a lot of companies, organizations use Square and Stripe. So how is iATS different than Square and Stripe?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's because of the markets that we serve. Square and Stripe do just a fantastic job of serving a broad market. I think of Square from a card present perspective. They've really kind of put the ability for anyone to be able to swipe a card and to get that, that little device. They've made it a lot easier there. And Stripe have done an equally good job. If you're a technology company that wants to just plug in a transactional ability to process a payment, then they've done a remarkable job really bringing integrated payments to the masses. What we've done is partly down to the sheer sort of breadth of customers and partners that we have, is the ecosystem of partnerships that allow us to serve a customer in a lot of different ways. So, if a customer is using one type of CRM, a nonprofit CRM, they're using a peer-to-peer fundraising software, they're using an auction software, then knowing the sector as I do, I can tell you it's highly likely we work with all of those software providers. So we can become the payment engine underneath all of them, help them consolidate their payments, help them consolidate so they get power of volume from a negotiation standpoint, they're getting the best rates. They have an ease of reconciliation because they understand it's one person, it's one organization to call, and one website to go to do the reporting and reconciliation. It makes things simple. And so that for us is really our secret sauce. We deploy fraud tools very, very quickly based on what we understand the risks at a certain time. So for example, we're doing right now mass enablement of certain fraud tools as we lead up into Giving Tuesday. We do that because we know what's going to happen. So we're preloading this on behalf of our customers, working with them, educating them as to the risks, what they need to be thinking about in order to mitigate the kind of concerns and challenges that we're worried about for them.
That's awesome.
So it allows us to be a little bit more focused and a bit more educational in how we work with our customers and our merchants.
Sounds like you sort of really want to be more of a partner to them than just a vendor, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that, and I think that we are oftentimes, it is an unseen and treated like a commodity. And the truth is that, I think payments, if they're not done well, they're absolutely a commodity. But if you're doing it right, it's not a commodity. It should not be. It should be a value add. And our perspective has always been, that's all we do. These organizations are serving whatever missions they are. They don't want to become a payment processor. Even our technology partners do not want to become payment processors. They want to focus on serving the customer, giving them the best back office solutions, the best accounting solutions, the best CRM solutions. They don't necessarily want to be a payment processor. And so we kind of stick to our knitting in that respect. And we feel it's our responsibility to try to educate and support our customers as best we can, because these are their donations. This is what makes them work. This is what makes them able to achieve whatever mission is they're trying to achieve. And so we don't take that lightly.
That's awesome. Okay, so last question. Once a nonprofit has set up an account, how do they behave differently compared to other verticals?
I think Ankel will know this because you have a nonprofit practice and you have the same appreciation for the type of organizations and that the nonprofits are and what they need differently. So I know that this resonates with you and your customers, which is nonprofits are not over-resourced. They need help. They usually have people that are wearing multiple hats. They usually have multiple things on the go. And so when they need help in real time. They need help from somebody that understands the challenges that they have understands the systems that they're working with, what they're trying to achieve, and they want access to that. And that's what our customers need. And I guarantee you that's what Encle's customers need as well, the nonprofit clients. And so, our service is structured like that. So we actually have a customer call center. We have a customer service center with 15 people. All they do is take calls from our nonprofit customers every single day. They understand the technology, they understand the payment, they understand what the nonprofits are trying to achieve. They only work with our customers, our nonprofit customers. And so that to us has always been, at a time when I think everyone is trying to find a way to automate stuff, to do sort of chat, to do this. Yeah, we want to make it simple for our customers to access us and get information in online reporting and all of those things. But we also want them to be able to pick up the phone and to get somebody to answer at the other end that knows what they're trying to do and to fix their problem. And that service level is, in our experience, is what we have found to be one of the most important things, because we may not have all the answers, but the fact that we understand what the problem is and we'll work to fix them exactly like Encle does, that's I think that is appreciated by our partners and our customers way more than, say, whether or not a transaction is 10 basis points more expensive or cheaper here. I think that those things are important, but they also focus very heavily on the service and responsiveness side in our sector.
Yeah. That's awesome. Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. I know the information that you've shared is going to be super helpful for many of the NPOs out there as they navigate this sometimes complex world of payment processing. So I appreciate your time and all of your insights and wish you all the best and the team at iATS.
Oh, thanks very much indeed. I really appreciate being invited. It's been, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great insights. Thank you so much.